Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Christian and Chris, for welcoming me, inviting me into your space, which it's an absolute delight to be able to join today. And so I really thank you for creating this space. And I know how difficult and challenging it can be to create Sangha and create space for Sangha and to do it week after week after week. And also I know how incredibly valuable and precious it is. And Chris invited me to share a little bit about, my background, my coming into the Dharma. And, when I got interested in the Dharma in the late 80s and early 90s, there weren't queer spaces, there weren't gay spaces for me to practice in like this. And at that time, particularly, my identity as a gay man was absolutely central to how I experienced the world and when I felt safe and when I didn't. And when I explored the Dharma communities in Seattle, where I lived then, I couldn't find a place where I was explicitly or even implicitly welcomed as a gay man. And when I checked in with, the people that I thought spoke for all of Buddhism, to see like what was their feeling about being gay, what were their teachings on that, I didn't feel welcome then either. And it really caused me to just shut down that interest for a while. I had a lot of other things to do. And so I just thought, okay, I guess this isn't for me. And then later in the early 2000s, I started getting interested again and found the landscape a little more welcoming. And I'm glad I did. And so I just really, just value this so much, and the spaces that we continue to create for queer people, for people of color, for people who are experiencing the world through their identities. So thank you. And also it's a really auspicious day for me. This is actually the 10th anniversary of our Sangha in Palm Springs, Insight Community of the Desert. And we're having a celebration later today. And our founding teacher, Larry Yang, will be with us, and which is lovely. And it should be a beautiful party. And I'm very grateful to some of my teachers like Larry, who really invited me into the Dharma in an even fuller way, and really helped me understand how and why we create safe space. And that's an ongoing teaching and learning. And Arinna Weisman, who is one of the early teachers to offer queer retreats, I think starting in the late 90s with Eric Colvig, and Leigh Brasington is another wonderful teacher that I love and respect so much. Just thank you very much for making this possible. And as we begin, I just want to notice what it feels like to be in community, what it's like to be with others in a field of practice. I often notice a kind of feeling of stillness in these spaces, virtual and physical, this communing, this practicing together, that caring together, that being quiet together, how powerful that is. When we're quiet together, like we were in that half-hour meditation, it's like the stillness becomes alive. becomes sacred space. And we create that sacred space, whether it's online or in ourselves or in community with others, through the beauty of our aspirations and our movement of the heart toward healing and wholeness, on whatever timetable that might be. So I read an interview with the Dalai Lama recently, and he spoke of how some traditions of Tibetan Buddhism don't actually refer to awakening. Instead, they refer to reawakening, re-enlightening. That sense of coming home, reclaiming, re-knowing something, coming back to a place of peace within ourselves, a still place. And that's what I'd really like to talk about today, stillness, equanimity, the refuge of that and the power of that. So to start, I wanted to offer a beautiful verse from the Sutta Nipata, which is a collection of the early teachings of the Buddha. And he says, "Know from the rivers in clefts and in crevices, those in small channels flow noisily. The great flow silent. Whatever is not full makes noise. Whatever is full is quiet." So a lot of us are drawn to meditation practice because of a quest for calm and peace, a need or yearning of the heart, a wish to be reconnected. For me, it was always just, there's something else. I just feel it. I know it. Something I want to remember. And attention is drawn to the big things, the opposites, the night and day, death and birth, coming and going. And yet, these are all processes with all these moments of in-between. Our cycles as living beings. There are all these processes, and there are all these pauses as well. You toss the ball up, and just for a moment, there's that space between rising and falling. And when we're watching the breath, maybe that space between inhale and exhale. Taste of equanimity, the still point of the turning world that T.S. Eliot wrote about, neither from nor toward. It's a reminder of our innate capacity to experience a pause that can hold whatever is arising. So right now, in this space, or any space or community that we're in, some of us are experiencing really challenging situations, maybe relationship, health, financial, work, or just the stress of being alive in this moment of history and the grief we may be feeling. And even in the midst of that, for some of us right now, things might be going relatively well. And if we aren't experiencing direct challenges in this moment, because we know we're human, it's only a matter of time before we're going to again. And the interesting thing to me is that probably most of us are experiencing some of each, some challenges, some ease, in different ratios, because this is also what it's like to be alive, to be human. It's just kind of a bizarre fact of this existence that, one moment I'm in despair for the world and feeling grief. And 10 minutes later, I'm delighting in the hummingbird outside my window and the view of the mountain. So it's very much a both and. And equanimity feels to me like it is the and, reminding us that there is a quiet, there is a stillness in the midst of everything, even when it seems crazy, even when it's beautiful. So I like to talk about this subject because I think it's a quality that we all intuitively understand. We all experience it, and we also forget. I forget a lot. And so I like to remind myself, oh, yes, there is this capacity, this birthright. This is part of life too. It's subtle, but it's here. And so much of what we do in spiritual communities is reminding ourselves of what we already intuit or feel, the subtle stuff, the stuff in between. And we experience it in different ways, maybe on retreat, maybe for a few moments during the meditation practice, or maybe being with a pet or a loved one, or maybe just waiting at the crosswalk, or maybe in this moment right now. Oh yeah, there's something that I can feel here. So equanimity appears in throughout the Buddha's teachings. It makes a lot of the lists, Buddhists make a lot of lists, and equanimity is maybe the star player, just about up there with mindfulness anyway. And those lists, of course, are because it was an oral tradition, and lists are a good way to remember. And so if you're trying to recall one of the lists and you're thinking, I wonder what else was on there, give equanimity a shot. It's seventh factor of enlightenment. It's one of the 10 beautiful qualities of mind and heart, the paramis. It's the fourth jhana, this deep experience of presence and stillness in meditation. And it's the fourth Brahmavihara. The Brahmavihara is these 4 interrelated aspects of a mature and full heart. Metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, appreciative joy, and upekkha, or equanimity. And over the years of COVID, we've started a Friday Metta group at our Sangha that's still going strong, meets by Zoom every week at 4:30. Please join us if you'd like. And so we've been practicing with all the different Brahmaviharas and in different ways, using visualization and phrases. And it's been beautiful to kind of experience different dimensions of the Brahmaviharas. And equanimity isn't as juicy seeming as love and compassion and joy, and yet it absolutely supports the fully integrated heart. To me, it almost seems like the framework of the heart. It has the sense of balancing and holding and being a foundation. Loving kindness or metta is like this energy of the unbounded heart, pure, powerful, like a flowing river, alive, resonating with whatever it encounters. And when it meets pain and struggle, it naturally takes the form of compassion. And when it meets joy, it takes on the energy of joy, of rejoicing, gladness. And then equanimity feels for me like what holds the other energies, like a riverbed holding the stream, with more love, with the kind of love that's wise and steady, solid. It's a mature love, wise, patient, tender. Gil Fronsdal calls it a grandmotherly love. And maybe we were fortunate enough as children to have experienced the love or attention of a wise elder, a loving grandparent, maybe a teacher, caregiver, a neighbor. It's said that just a few experiences of that kind of presence and deep, mature love in childhood can be enough to get us through. That wise and patient elder that's seen it all before and knows the ups and downs of life and knows that what we are experiencing is very real, and yet also knows how to hold it with wisdom and loves all the more because of their life experience. And we each have access to this place, to this same energy. We can be that loving, wise elder or caregiver for ourselves. We can touch into the energy of equanimity. This is one of the natural states of mind, our birthright. So we experience moments of stillness and non-reactivity every day. But sometimes the absence of movement or of drama is subtle. And yet, when our minds are occupied in wanting or not wanting, restlessness, it's like choppy water. It's really difficult to see our deepest truths. When the water is still, it's easier to see clearly and deeply, for wisdom to be present. And that's why it's an awakening factor, a necessary condition for clear seeing, for insight, for that reawakening process. And in this stilling, it's not indifference. We don't lose or set aside our capacity to feel, and that's so important. And we don't lose the richness of our emotional life, but instead, because of that foundation of stillness, we're able to be present for our emotional life with tenderness, with care, with steadiness. We're able to make some space for it. So quieting, but not a dampening. If it feels hard or gray or cold, then we notice that's not equanimity. Maybe it's a means of bypassing or coping, but it's not equanimity because it doesn't have the other aspects of love in it. And this capacity can help us hold others with respect and tenderness and wisdom. And that can be very challenging when we feel that they're behaving in ways that are harming themselves. Sometimes when we engage in like very formal equanimity practice, as it's taught in the commentaries, we might offer phrases like, I wish you happiness, but I cannot live your life for you. I cannot make your choices for you. Sometimes I've had in life the feeling of, if only I knew how to love you enough in the way that you really need, you wouldn't have to go through this. That desire to fix or change. A few years ago, actually it's about 8 years ago now, I was in a really challenging situation with a very dear loved one who was sick. And because of their preferences around Western medical care, there was no diagnosis, there was no usual treatment that I could understand. And the circumstances for this person seemed to change almost daily or weekly, from things being okay or seeming okay, and the person being very hopeful, and me being hopeful. And then things being obviously very difficult and painful and unspoken. And there was a hard limit to what I could know about the situation, what this person was willing to share or to have me know. And as much as I loved, I had no control. I had no control over the choices that they were making. And it was really difficult to watch this unfold, especially as my emotions were latching on to whatever was happening that day or week, clinging, And I felt like I was being towed along with no idea where this was going. And I wanted so much for the situation to be different. And I couldn't stop loving. And yet I needed a wiser way of loving. So the pattern and the confusion, my confusion, continued for months until a period when I was doing a lot of practice. And I remember one morning I was hiking with David, my husband, and just appreciating the experience of that and being out in nature. And as it often did, the nagging worry of what's going to happen, how is this going to resolve, what's going on, started its course in my mind. But this time, because of the relative mental stillness from practice and the support of being in nature, this wider view, I was able to access that still point, the place that exists outside of the running toward or running away, the clinging, the rejecting, the center of the wheel. And I suddenly remember seeing the situation from the perspective of the mountain that I was hiking, and the knowledge just came really clear that what I was watching with this loved one was like a spinning top wobbling, and the closer it gets to falling down, the wider and wider the movements, the more dramatic the movements. And I could just feel intuitively that this was true. And even though it wasn't at all what I wanted, I was finally able to be with the situation with equanimity, with tenderness toward this person, and tenderness toward myself, with love and with wisdom, that wisdom of the elder. I cannot live your life for you. When I let that go, I let go of my need for it to be other than it was. And then I could be with this person so much more fully. I could simply love them in the way that they needed, with nothing added. So non-reactivity doesn't mean non-responsiveness, but rather through practice and remembering the stillness, the equanimity that we're reclaiming, remembering, developing, we're less pulled out on the wheel of reactivity. We're closer to center. So our actions maybe become a little less about reacting, reifying self, and more about how do I respond from this wise, knowing place of stillness. What Pamela Weiss calls the appropriate response. What is the appropriate response from that place? Stillness is the basis of enlightened action. When a bodhisattva or a Buddha to be, or an enlightened being, or a great leader for justice like Dr. King or John Lewis or someone like that takes action, what is the ground of that action? What supports it? When Kuan Yin or Green Tara, our human heroes, hear the cries of the world and move to answer them, it must be from a love of great compassion and supported, strengthened by equanimity, that sureness, that stillness of the heart, the whole heart. So when we practice to expand that, our awareness, our capacity of equanimity and stillness, it's a refuge, not a hideout. It's a place to act from. And the Buddha gave us his own example. After his awakening experience, he reflected a while. What did he want to do with this freedom that he'd realized? And he could have hung out in bliss, in the bliss of Nibbana for the rest of his life. And he didn't. Instead, he spent more than 40 years teaching, engaged, caring, compassionate. And one of his teachings that I appreciate so much is what he called the eight worldly winds or conditions, these pairs of opposites, the ups and downs, the joys and sorrows of every life. And he named praise and blame, success and failure, pleasure and pain, and fame and disrepute. And then you could add many more: joy and sorrow, gain and loss, content and discontent, health and sickness. And in one of the suttas, the Buddha says that these states, these worldly winds, will arise in the experience of someone who isn't on the path and someone who is on the path, that no one is exempt. Our practice doesn't stop these from happening, from being experienced. He says that there's a difference when we practice, that without practice we may not see that whatever is arising, pleasant or unpleasant, is inconstant, subject to change. We may not have developed that patient wisdom of equanimity to know, to remember that we are always existing within change. And when we practice, he says that we start to see everything that arises as it really is. That's the wisdom of awareness, that we're seeing inconstancy. We're seeing that things and occurrences in the world are liable to cause suffering when we cling or hate them, and that everything that we experience is subject to change. So our capacity for equanimity is our refuge from these worldly winds. Doesn't mean that we don't experience them. It's like a home. It's the equinox, that still point, the center that holds, a refuge from clinging and aversion. So a great analogy for this, for me, is a spinning wheel. So here's the wheel of samsara. And just a heads up that if you have visual sensitivities, flashing lights bug you, you might want to look away. So, wow, the thing starts flashing the minute you pick it up. So, okay, so it's actually a baby toy and not the wheel of samsara. You stick it on a smooth surface and the baby spins it around. So there's samsara, spinning, always spinning, and then out here on the edge of the wheel, there's a lot going on. There's colors, there's lights, there's shapes, there's rattlers, there's all this stuff, and it's really dramatic. That's where we spend a lot of time, because this is where attention gets pulled. And at the same time that all of this is going on, there's also the axle at the center of the wheel. So for me, what I look at is like what we're doing in the practice of remembering and developing equanimity is making a subtle shift, bringing attention from here, from this part, to here. And that all the time that this is happening, that this center is also present. This is happening too. So visual stuff kind of works for me. And I was thinking, during the meditation period, so many times, different things coming up, and like just watching myself spinning a story. Why did they do that? Why didn't I respond in this way? And realizing I'm out here on the edge, spinning around, and then like that subtle remembering. It doesn't have to be a pushing away of this, but it's just a remembering that this is here too at the same time. I can live out there in a lot of motion, forgetting that there's a center, or I can live in the center and make space for everything that's going on all around me. It's a both and. And we have these practices like the development of equanimity in the Brahmaviharas to expand our capacity of the heart, to hold the joys and sorrows, the winds. I mean, it's really what we do every time we sit, I think. We're choosing with mindfulness where to place attention. And we may not always be able to do that, but we may remember more and more that we have this capacity. And the more we make a practice of remembering, the more likely we are to remember when circumstances are challenging. This reclaiming our own center, not where dominant culture says it is, because I think we all know where dominant culture would like us to be, where social media wants us to be, where the market economy and all the rest of it wants to be. And it isn't at the center of the wheel. So, a refuge, not a hideout, a source to choose with tenderness and discernment what is really important in this moment. When I don't give away my balance, when I strengthen my capacity of equanimity, there is enlightened choice. There's enlightened choice in that moment. Like I felt with that dear one who was sick. Choice that leads to less suffering for me, for those I love, and for the world that I live in. Those worldly winds that the Buddha named, the natural rhythms of life. I often reflect how I need to live in harmony with nature. And nature is under no obligation to arrange itself to my wishes or my personal and cultural delusions. Nature can often be such a support, slowing down, observing ourselves as beings of nature, supported by nature. Grounding in, reconnecting to equanimity and the endless cycles of being, coming together, the coming apart, rise and set of the sun and the moon, and seasons and the tides, these bodies breathing in and breathing out, changing constantly. We exert and we rest, we experience joy and sorrow, and the whole universe breathing and changing in the stillness, from the stillness, with stillness at the heart. And our practice strengthens that view, seeing beyond categories, seeing the processes instead of fixed things. Sitting in the middle of life with tenderness. I don't know where I got that from, but sitting in the middle of life with tenderness. When we practice, when we sit, or whatever we do to remember our inner stillness, maybe it's chanting or lighting a candle or caring for an animal or a plant or cooking a beautiful meal or just being outside and looking up at the sky. We're engaged in a radical activity, counter dominant culture activity. Right? So we're choosing to be rather than to be defined, to let go rather than to consume, to cooperate rather than to compete. The spinning world gives me a set of norms, and I know that they can't describe me or anyone else or contain our hearts truly. So one more sharing. This is from the Dhammapada, more words of the Buddha. There are those who discover they can leave behind confused reactions and become as patient as the earth, unmoved by anger, unshaken as a pillar, unperturbed as a clear and quiet pool. So let's sit for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then we can move into comments and thoughts. And perhaps reflecting how you know stillness, how you feel it. Maybe there's even a place in the body that is your landing place, your inner refuge. Maybe taking refuge in that still awareness. It's able to hold whatever is here. So I think we have time for comments, questions, thoughts. Particularly love to know how you might practice with this yourself. Oh, Bob. Hi. Can you unmute yourself, or do you? There.
Okay. I want to thank you for everything you've offered today. I very much need to hear that. And if you could come back in about 20 minutes, I would be happy to. If I understood or understand the symbolism of the toy that you were spinning, somehow being in touch with the center is what I would like to be able to do, but I'm so distracted by the bells and whistles whirling on the outside of my life. I like having that image around, and I'm hoping I can use it to gain some contact with the center. So again, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you so much. And yeah, and that's, you know, in 20 minutes, there's another Dharma group somewhere meeting. So that's, you know, that's the basis for me, is just keep practicing and keep practicing with community. And I found that image really helpful myself. So that's why I like to share that, you know, and a part of it too is that, you know, there's just so much motion, you know, and the Buddha taught like motion, that's where there's friction, that's where the rub is. And yet at the same time that that's happening, you know, can I access that place where there isn't so much motion? So the closer we come to the center. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
Jeff, thank you for a lovely talk. I love the topic of equanimity, and I kept being struck with images of the yin-yang and of ride motorcycles on long trips, and I noticed that at high speeds on the freeway that the wheels themselves spinning would at the axle point, it was hard to make the bike not vertical because there was such an uplifting force to it that you could ride without having your hands on the handlebars, for example, or a kind of center port, you know, an axis, one that you were talking about. It's physical.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I thank you for pointing out the physical nature of it too, because the other thing that I found really helpful in developing this for myself, particularly when I sit, is to look for, and if we'd had more time, I would have done a guided meditation on it, but kind of looking for that place within you that is your physical landing place. You know, where is that? You know, is there a place? You know, and some people find it in the abdomen or the belly or the heart or different places in the body, but is there a place that you can touch into that can help be a bridge to that sense of equanimity? And also physical experiences that we've had can be a great, you know, like your experience on the motorcycle, remembering that can be a great doorway back into that state of balance or stillness. I found that really, really helpful in my own practice. Sometimes just remembering some of the meditation experiences that I've had where there has been a lot of equanimity present, you know, just recalling that can help me connect in the present.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, Chris.
Hey, great. Thanks for the talk. I want to run out and get one of those wheels now. That was just like so cool. I could stare at that all day. I mean, I go into a 7-hour spin probably 15, 20 minutes. So it's a good visual take. You know, you're bringing up coming to practice in the 90s. And that was when actually the first times I came to GBF. And, you know, at that time, there was even a question out there whether the Dalai Lama would approve homosexuals being Buddhists or something. That was kind of stirring up in the 90s, and it was such a refuge to come to GBF and just be able to sit with this crowd of men at the Buddhist center there. You know, some 50 have said, wait, we're going to challenge this. What the hell is he talking about, huh?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I felt really honored, really happy to be in San Francisco, because you could find sanghas and sitting groups at that time where the teachers might be gay or lesbian. I mean, Hartford Street and Isan Dorsey was a really strong bond. And then the straight community started to learn that we were kind of like part of them. Anyway, it's you brought that up and I started thinking about that. I got a chance to look at your website. You guys have a beautiful website. I imagine you had part of some of the work on that, and it's just really quite a nice, accessible website. And I noticed a lot of great programs to join in. So thank you for offering that out. And I just noticed that you have this sort of yearly sitting at Joshua Tree with Arinna and stuff. And that would be really a lovely time to be at Joshua Tree if it's in the early spring, because it's the early bloom of the desert. So does that happen annually?
Yeah, it's actually in the fall. It's
fall.
and so it's still a beautiful time of year. It's cooling off, but it's not super cold yet. And it's this year I'm not 100% sure of the dates, but I believe it's the last 2 weeks in October, and it will be Arinna, me, and Booker. And it's a beautiful, long-standing retreat. I just joined in the last 5 years, but it's been going for decades, actually. And thank you, Chris, for naming that. I didn't say who the teachers were that I checked in with in the 90s, but definitely the Dalai Lama was one of them. And I didn't yet kind of have the wisdom to know, okay, even great teachers can have places of delusion and misinformation, and I didn't have the strength to claim my space, and so I'm so grateful. There were groups. I didn't know GBF was meeting that long ago, but I'm so grateful that there were groups like GBF, actually claiming space and practice, and the blessing of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and if anyone wants these, they're on Amazon. They're like $12 or something.
It feels like illness is part of nature, and when I'm not feeling well, and is there a meditation approach that you use to kind of connect with nature, or deep disconnect from nature when you're just feeling nature sucks and you want to be somewhere else?
Right. Yes, and this happens being human. We have these times when we just don't want to be in this body. It's too painful, it's too difficult, it's too challenging. And yet, it's the 8 worldly winds again. There's health and sickness, pleasure and pain. It's this is what we experience as living bodies. So the only thing that I know that is helpful is to pendulate my attention in terms of having compassion for the situation that I'm in, the physical experience that I'm having, and seeing if I can not spin out on the mental side of it, spin out on the stories. So that part is the optional part. I've got the physical things going on, and I know that they are going to keep going on in different ways, and I've got to be with that. But can I not add with the stories, and can I pendulate my attention with the pain in whatever way is appropriate in the moment? So there is that wisdom of equanimity. So I have chronic back issues, and when it hits me, it is it's just the worst pain. I literally can't move for days. And then when I can move, it's absolute hell for weeks. And that happened a few months ago, and I was really watching, how do I live with this? How do I live with this pain? And what I found is, yes, I can really do what my teachers tell me to do and stay with the physical sensations, notice them changing, notice where they are, how they are, and really watch and make space for my reactions to them. And then I can know also when it's time to not do that, when it's time to just distract myself, to go out on the edge of the wheel. What's the appropriate response in this moment? So I would never say it's one thing or the other. It's that kind of balance of when can I be with this, and when do I need a break from it, in whatever way that is for me. And an image that I've been working with a lot lately is this sense of like sharing a bench with. So I was at a Buddhist shrine, and there was this beautiful image of the Buddha, and I wanted to sit there next to it. And there was a woman sitting on the bench, and I didn't know, like, was there space there for me? And she just kind of scooted over just a little bit and held out her hand, like welcoming me to that space. And that's what I've been trying to do when I'm dealing with things that are difficult, is just scooting over a little bit, not giving up my seat or my center or my place of practice, but making a little bit of room for what's here in the space of the Dharma, in the space of the Buddha, in the space of stillness, to whatever level that's available for me in that particular moment.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, you're welcome. It's the most difficult thing for most of us. Yeah. And this is the other thing. I'll just add one more thing. I know we're almost at time, but I'm more and more, I'm realizing the message of the Buddha is like, life is very difficult. Do we want to keep being born again and again and again into this life, whether you believe in rebirth or not? What is the escape? And the Buddha talked about the escape so much. What is the relief from this life? And that comes through our practice and through deep wisdom. It's the culmination of the path. It's nibbana. It's the end of suffering. So it's not just about right now and living better in this moment. So, thank you.